My name is Max Banfield. Welcome to my talk. Today I'll be discussing the Apple computer, which is one of the world's best inventions. And how I came to be using them for more than 20 years. Apple Computer Incorporated was founded in 1976 by Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak and Ronald Wayne to sell Steve Wozniak's Apple I personal computer. It began for me in 1994 when I was diagnosed with cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and given 2 months to live with no hope of a cure and advised to write my will. The conclusion that I came to at that stage was that if I was selling anything else for profit, there wouldn't be much point because I wouldn't live long enough to spend the money. So I decided to write a book about posture and health, which I'd been studying for many years. And so I started by writing a paragraph a day. I was getting a lot of pain sitting at a desk, so it was generally scribbled out. And after a while, it reached a total of 20 pages. So I went to a typist and I had it typed out into neat print. And then I went to a computer programmer who produced it on a book format. And he'd give me a disc, which I could take to a printer in town, which was South Australia's first commercial computer printer. And it was probably 12 or more feet long. And the computer program would give me a disc which contained the book. And in town, they'd put it in their computer in one room, and in the other room, the computer would start printing it. It would come out the other end as pages, then they'd produce a cardboard cover and they'd staple it together and give me the books. And I then went and sold them to school and public libraries. Now, it wasn't long before I found difficulty paying the costs involved. So I found a uni student who would place my handwritten document straight onto a computer, and it just happened to be an Apple computer. And then sometime after that, I couldn't afford that either. So I then decided to learn how to type. And I went to Pickles Auctions. And after a while, I saw some items that I might want. And then I attended an auction where there were probably 150 people there, quite a few items. And this particular item came up and was a typewriter, which had a screen on it about 2 inches by 3 or 4 inches wide. And as you typed, it would print out some brief words like welcome to my talk, for example, but it couldn't fit much more space on it. So the bidding started, I think, at 2,500, and it got down to 2,000, and then 1,500, and then 1,000, and then 500, and then it got down to $5, and I said, I'll give you $5 for it. And 150 people laughed uncontrollably because they knew what I didn't know, that it was called, they called it a boat anchor. It was very heavy. And so I paid for the item, and then I got one of their staff to put it in the boot of my station wagon, and it was so heavy that the back suspension springs almost went flat, and I was driving down the road like that. Barely able to see in the front of my car. It looked like I was about a plane about to take off. That's how heavy it was. I eventually got home, and later that night I got one of my neighbours to help me lift it in and put it on my desk. And when that happened, I'd already established a way of standing at a desk, because I was getting a lot of pain just sitting there, and so less pain standing, but still having a lot of problems. And so on top of that, I placed this heavy computer. And the desk bowed, and then the legs splayed apart. And I could hear it creaking, and it gave the impression that it would soon crack and split down the middle. So I lifted the central part of the desk up and then got some very heavy beams of wood and bolted them to the legs so that the desk became more stable. Well, I couldn't learn much on that typewriter, So I went back to Pickles Auctions and I bought another computer. It was the Apple Classic II, and it had a screen about 12 inches square. It's all in one computer, and I learned to type 60 words a minute on it. And that computer cost me about $110 at auction. I learnt to type about 60 words a minute on it eventually, and that's 3 times handwriting speed. And that was good for me because I didn't like sitting at the desk or even standing at it for very long at that stage. So I then went and purchased an LC3. And this was what everyone called a pizza box because of its shape. And it had a separate cathode ray tube monitor. Connected by a cord. And I then purchased an Apple computer that was called a 6100 and later a 7200. And I think at one stage also a 7300. There were other computers available that I didn't actually buy, and one was the Apple 5200 all-in-one computer. Around about that time, I also did a 12-week course for 2 hours a week at Adobe PageMaker at a TAFE college. And I learned how to type or book onto pages, but they weren't just blank pages with type on them. They're actually part of a program where the pages were automatically numbered, and you could automatically link to a table of contents and automatically link to an index at the end of the book. And you could place diagrams in between the typing that you was producing. So basically I could type straight onto a book and end up with a book file for the printer without having to pay a typist or a computer programmer, which was becoming difficult to afford. Now I'm about to show you a diagram which shows you what I was doing in 1998. By then I had increased the height of the desk, and I drew it as a diagram to signify what it was like. It's not accurate in terms of the details of the individual bits and pieces. It's accurate in terms of the positioning as far as I can do it myself. And you'll notice there's a cathode ray tube monitor, and there'd be an Apple computer under it. I'm not sure what that diagram represents, but probably one of the computers available at that time from the 6100 through to the 7300. Now you can see I've drawn a skeleton there. Well, the reason I did that is one reason is I couldn't draw. And so I got a diagram that was 500 years old and modified it. And because it's 500 years old, it's out of copyright. And also it's got it's not a photo of me, and that's because the illnesses that I was studying relating to posture were generally considered to be mental disorders, mental pains, imaginary pains. And I was saying, no, they're physical pains, no one would believe me, so I still had to avoid the stigma of mental illness. So that's the diagram. It actually represents me, but it's a skeleton. And also, I published a book under the name of M.A. Banfield so that nobody would know it was my book. My name is Max, and most people I know knew me as Max. Nobody knew me as Banfield. That's a few details for you. Now, about a year later, or probably less than that, the cancer became aggressive. And I had to go in for cancer surgery, which is there. You could probably see if you had a close look, to remove a lump the size of a hen's egg from my neck, and then 6 months of chemo. And around about that time, I also had heart disease and was given 2 months to live, or so 2 weeks to live, advised to write my will. And then about a year or more later, the cancer came back. And I was told to have 6 months of DHAP chemotherapy. The previous chemo was CHOP chemotherapy. And that involved a lot of nausea and vomiting and dry reaching. And I was recovered from that. And then I was advised to go in for a stem cell transplant or I could die. So I was also asked to write my will for the 3rd time because I was going in for a stem cell transplant, which, unbeknown to me at that time, would be followed by 2 or more years of side effects. And but I didn't have time to write my will because I wanted to get my book published. By then it was the 11th edition, was over 1,000 pages, 1,005 pages. So I had 2 ways of doing that. One was from using an external disk drive, and the other one was having a zip disk driver inside the computer. And I purchased a zip disk. And this contained 100 meg space, and that was a lot of space in those days. And it could hold my 1,000-page book. So I put the disk into my computer, saved my 1,000-page book file onto it, took it out, and went down to the post office, and I paid $1 for a post box, a little box 6 inches square by about 1 centimetre deep, and I paid $1 postage down. I posted it off to a company in Grange, down near the beach. Now the boss had an Apple computer, and he put my disk in it. It would go through to a server in another room and then be retrieved by a computer programmer in another room, and he'd press a button on his computer, and out in a back shed 30 yards away there's a 20-foot long computer printer, and that would print out this 1,000 pages. They'd later be sewn into sets of pages and then later bound into a book. I arranged for that to happen, and if I died, for the books to be given away for free to school and public libraries, and if I lived, I'd sell it myself. Now, 15 years earlier, in 1985, Steve Jobs got into an argument with the other people at Apple. And as a result of that, he left with several of his colleagues, and they set up a company called Next to develop their own computers and computer software. And he later became chief executive officer of a company called Pixar. Now, at that time, Disney was producing cartoon movies using pencils and paint brushes to make sketches, and a number of sketches to produce that movie. Well, what they did at Pixar was to get the computer engineers to arrange for that to be more efficient. And the first movie that they produced, the first computer animated movie, was Toy Story. And several more followed. That's 1995. And they became amongst the top selling movies of all time, and still are, as you can see from here. Now, in the meantime, Apple Computer Company was getting into more and more financial difficulty. So they arranged for Steve Jobs to come back. And when he got back, he sacked a couple of people who'd argued with him in the past. And he also set about solving a problem. And one of the problems with computers at that time was a lot of people didn't want to buy them because they're too complicated and confusing. So he said to his engineers he wants to combine all the electronics and all the internet and computer componentry together so that if a member of the public bought it, they just press the start button and be only one or two easy steps away from going on the internet or sending emails. And that's what most people wanted to do. And the first one, they called it was the Internet Mac, and so they called it the iMac. And the first one to come out was in a Bondi blue colour. But at the same time, it recruited a designer to redesign the shape of the outer shell of the computers to replace the old beige boxes. And the first iMac to come out was Bondi blue, as I said, and it sold very well and got Apple out of financial difficulties. And here's a range of colours that followed. It was quite a successful series of computers. And by then, because I'd gone to computer auctions, I'd started buying and selling some occasionally. And so I could tell you that they were more popular than the previous one. Now, in 1999, they've also brought out, they also modified the laptops and improved the shape and design of them. And they called them the clamshells. And they brought them out in a series of colours, as you can see there. Now, they did have a design flaw. For example, they're supposed to have a little pads underneath them, which keep the laptop off the ground so that air can ventilate underneath them. But if people use them on their laps or on a cushion or whatever, they'd overheat. And they tended to get burn marks on them, like cigarette burns from that overheating. And that, of course, made them subject to other faults. And so they redesigned them later. And they stopped calling them laptops and started calling them notebooks and power books to stop people from using them that way. The next computer that came out was the Apple G3 Tower in about 1993. And as you can see here, one of the features of it was that it was easier to open. All you did is basically press a lever on the side and it opened out. And there's plenty of space in there for you to change CD drives, to change the RAM, or to add or take away hard drives or airport cards, etc. Now the next one that they brought out was the G4 the G4 Tower. And this was in a graphite colour. And it was more powerful than the G3, and by then I was using that. I actually used that type of computer when it became available at auctions on the second-hand market. And you can see a photo of my desk and that computer, and notice there are two LCD flat screen monitors there. The cathode ray tube monitors were being replaced by these flat screen monitors at that stage. Now you can notice that my desk is a lot more detailed than the sketch that I'd drawn before. And in all those sketches I deliberately left out important details. So if people copied my desk design, like furniture companies or something, they'd never get it right, because all they do is copying it and they don't know why it works, how it works, or anything like that. They claim to have done surveys to work out what they're doing, but they've just copied me. And I have to protect myself against intellectual property thieves, which is good, because it's still my copyright till 7 years after I'm dead, and nobody's ever asked me permission to use this stuff. So until they do, they should be paying me 5% royalty for every disc. Now, you can see again that there's no photo of me. In front of that disc, for the same reason. All the aches and pains caused by in office workers didn't show up on x-rays or blood tests and considered to be mental disorders, and I was still avoiding the stigma of mental illness. It was inappropriate. I didn't have any mental problems, but I did have all the aches and pains, and none of them showed up on x-rays. And they were all relieved by that desk design. That's why they're selling now, because of the health benefits, say, the people who make them and promote them. Now, the next one that came out, or around about that time, was the G4 Cube. This is only 8 inches square, and it was very popular and very stylish. In fact, it's something that I wanted to get because of that, but it was so popular, it didn't really come on the second-hand market often enough, and also it was too popular, it's too expensive. But it did go out of style because it did tend to get a crack, but you can see how easy it was to take apart and repair from these diagrams. Now the next one was a G4 Dome. And one day, you can see from their shape that they're a bit awkward to carry. And you can see that device connecting the dome to the screen. It looks fragile. So I didn't know whether to pick it up by the screen or whether to pick it up by the connecting device there or the dome. And I was picking it up awkwardly and I dropped it from about 4 foot in the air onto concrete, and it made a hell of a noise, but it didn't break, neither did the concrete. And I thought it never working and I have to throw it away. I put it back on the desk and it worked. And it kept on working for another few years, and I kept on using it. Now the next computer I'd like to talk about is one that they had, was the G5 Tower. And this was a very powerful and a very heavy and very large by comparison to the others. But it did have a design flaw, generally speaking. People would complain about the noise of the fans inside, and that can be annoying to office workers. The next one is the Mac Mini 2005 that came out. I would have bought it a few years later. They'd introduced the Intel chip to the Macs, and this one had an Intel chip, and I bought a duo core one, and I'm still using it occasionally. And the next ones I'd like to talk about are the PowerBooks and the MacBooks. they come out in a white colour, and as I said, they replace the clamshells. Now, while this was going on, in that general period of time, they also introduced iTunes, and they also invented the iPod, and that's a small device where they advertise or promoted it as being a device where you could put 1,000 songs in your pocket. And they also produced the iPad and the iPhone. And later, this is sometime later, the iWatch, and then things like the Apple CarPlay. Now, while this was happening, I would also occasionally go to the Apple Computer Club, and they would occasionally have videos of Steve Jobs launching a new product. And he started to look a bit thin and generally a bit sick. And it related to the fact that in 2003 he'd been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. But he denied that because he's afraid that the shareholders in his company would dump the shares in a panic, and that Apple would get into financial difficulty again. Now, further in the background, when he was young, he had some of the characteristics of a hippie. Reported as smoking marijuana, living in a commune, and he grew up with the idea that you could cure diseases with traditional methods such as fasting and meditation, etc. Well, they can't cure cancer, and so he died at age 56 in 2011, and his personal worth was over $10 billion. So, in the background, he'd established a culture of creativity in the company amongst the engineers and the business people, and they'd been producing items called such as the i5s and the i7s, and there's a duo core version that was available in 21-inch and 27-inch screens, and about 1.5 inches thick at the sides, and they had a CD slot. Well, they then made the CD obsolete, so they brought out the slim version of the same type of computer, only 0.5 centimetre thick at the top and no CD slot at the side. And that's one that I purchased and used to prepare this talk. And they also brought out the Mac Pro, which is 10-inch high and a cylindrical shape. Now, on August the 2nd, 2018, not long ago, Apple was reported as being the first US public corporation to be valued at more than $1 trillion. And I've been doing my writing about medical matters, medical research for 40 years, and for more than 20 years with the best computers in the world. And this speech was prepared on a 27-inch iMac quad-core i7. Now, if you go back to before I started with computers, I'd been writing books on posture and health, and essays and books, and eventually came to the conclusion that sitting at the desk was the cause of my health problems, and that the standing desk of a particular height and dimension relieved a lot of those pains. And you can see here a photo of desks that used to exist. And now you can see a photo of Apple's sales rooms. They're all standing desks. And now standing desks are selling in the millions. I'm the inventor. The other people who say they invented had nothing to do with the research or the invention. But this is Apple stores all around the world. If you go into them, they're all standing there. That's something to think about. Thank you.